guys, it's Michelle from Little Mama's House, and today I am going to be doing a much requested and long awaited tutorial, which is how to dye Louis Vuitton Epi leather. And so you see here I have our subject, which is one of my customers, Epi Speedy, I think this is a 30, Epi Speedy 30, and this was originally in that Kenyan fawn color, or a brownish, so you can see the handles aren't done. So that this and this side are the original color, and she requested that we dye it black. So what I've done is gone ahead and, as you can see, I mean, if I scratch into this, this is done. I've done 2 coats of dye on 3 of the 4 sides and the bottom, but I left this side undyed so that I can show you how to do it without you having to sit through me dyeing an entire bag. Just this section will be enough, and the handles will be enough for me to show you how the process works. So let's go ahead and get started. Now what I have to complete this project are my black leather dye. Today I'm using Kelly's. That's just what I was able to get. I have a very reputable cobbler near me who has been in business over 50 years, and they sell both Fibings and Kelly's, which Fibings owns Kelly's. So Kelly's is like their professional line of dye products, and just depends on what they have in the store. He just happened to be out of Fibings black when I went, so I have the Kelly's professional black leather dye. It's equivalent to Fibings. It's the same alcohol-based dye. I have some acetone nail polish remover. I have my paintbrushes and other implements. For a bag of this size, and since we're dyeing the whole thing black, my preferred tool is a little cotton swabber that comes with your dye when you get it. And then I have 2 old socks, and one sock is going to be for applying acetone, and one sock is going to be for wiping between coats. And do try to keep them separate, because you don't want to keep wiping with acetone once you're done and it's set, because that's going to be taking layers of dye off with it. So just make sure you know, like I know the one with the pink is my acetone, and this one is just for wiping between coats. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first step when you're dealing with Epi leather, it is a little bit different than Vachetta in that you need to do a little bit more dye prep to it. You need, rather than just using a dye prep solution, you need to really sort of deglaze it, because Epi leather, if you've ever looked at it carefully, does have a slight sheen over the top of it. Okay, and so if you try to apply dye directly to this without prepping it, the dye will not soak into the leather. It will sit on top. It will be vulnerable to scratching. It won't be durable, as if you had taken the time to properly prepare the surface before applying the dye. You can use isopropyl alcohol. It is another option here to deglaze the Epi. However, I happen to like the acetone a little bit better. I think it gets it a little duller, if you will, and all that sheen will be restored to the bag once we seal it. But for purposes of applying the dye, which is step 1, you really need to deglaze. So I happen to use this. Now, an important step when you're dealing with Epi is that if you feel the Epi, or anybody who's familiar with Epi will tell you that it's textured. So it has a grain. Now that grain is not permanent. So if I were to take my acetone and start scrubbing on the leather with it, it will take that beautiful texture right off. So I cannot stress this enough. When you come in with your acetone to deglaze the section you're going to work on, and I do tackle this type of bag in sections, work gently. I cannot stress that enough. You don't want to push. You want to be swift. You don't want to let your acetone-soaked cloth absorb onto any one particular spot. You will see some color transfer, and you probably won't be able to see it on my used sock, but you will be able, when you do this on yours, to see it'll look like this Kenyan fawn color is coming up off the bag. Do not panic. We are dyeing the bag, so if some of this color comes off, it's not that big of a deal. If you were just cleaning this and tried to clean it with acetone and you were taking color off, I would say stop immediately. But in this case, we're really just trying to break down that first coat of sheen on your bag so that the leather has something to stick to, if for lack of a better phrase. So what I'm doing is I'm just going ahead and rubbing down this surface. I'm going to rub this tab because I got some dye on it before, but I hadn't prepped it, and that's not fatal. You just rub it down, and we'll treat it while we do this side. Okay, make sure you get your piping. And you know, I hope you can see how gently, I'm not applying any pressure, I'm just rubbing. And if you look very, very closely under the black, you'll see there's some of the original dye used to dye the bag this color because the leather didn't come off the cow this color. It was treated. So some of that comes off, but it's not fatal. It's not much. It's really, if you look, it's not like there's a big white spot now. It's just, if you can tell the difference from before when I showed it to you, some of that sheen is now broken down. Okay? So that's the first and I would say most important step to this process when you're dealing with epi, because otherwise everything you do afterwards is not going to stick. It will be prone to chipping. It will be more like if you just took paint and painted your epi, which you could do that if you wanted to, but this is a dye job, so we want it to be as permanent as possible so that the bag can be used. So, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just apply my dye, and you all have seen me do this if you've been watching my channel a million times, so there's really nothing different about this part of the process. I use the dauber because there's really no need to be finicky here. We're dyeing everything. We're not just doing piping where I need my tiny little brush, although I will use my tiny little brush, at least for this initial swipe through. It's not needed. We can just sort of apply it on, and you want to do this relatively fast because you don't want your dye to seep into those ridges because that's going to create streaks in your finished product. So you want to swipe this on pretty quickly. And you don't have to be perfect. We're going to do several coats, so if you miss a little area, it's not fatal, but you want to work relatively swiftly. And you don't want to let your dye pool. So if you can see here, I'm trying to work so that my dye doesn't all drip down one side, you know, just enough on your dauber so that you're saturating your area, but then you're spreading it out quickly so that there's not one area that's sitting in dye any more than any other. If that makes any sense whatsoever. Okay, so I have that all on. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my other sock, not the acetone sock. I'm going to put it on my hand like a glove, and I'm just going to wipe off any excess dye. This is an important step with epi because, again, any excess that's left sitting on there is going to absorb into that texture, and it's just going to look wrong. Just like with just like when you do vernis, how you don't want, if you leave it on there, it'll seep in and sit and pool in those LVs, that embellished part. The same thing will happen on your epi. Okay, so that's the first go around. Now what I like to do is take one of my smaller brushes, if I can find one that is not, I didn't clean them well last time. Shh, don't tell. I take one of my smaller brushes, I dip it in my dye, and I come back and I really get in the cracks of the piping in case there's any I missed, because especially when you're going from a medium to light color like that Kenyan fawn, if there's a little bit of that fawn that I miss, the customer will be able to see that. It's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So when I come back, I just want to look at it with a very critical eye. I want to look at it from all different angles. I always like to do the sides of my tab, the back of my tab. Anything that's going to really stick out on the finished product needs to be gone over so that it's not visible. And, you know, this part, there's no rush. You're working with such little amounts of dye here during, you know, this part of the process that there's no rush to get through to wipe. You know, don't load the dye on. It's very hard to see because my brush is black and the dye is black, but there's very actual little amount of dye in the product. I know it looks like I'm digging into that jar of dye, but it's about this full. So I have to dip down just to even get a little bit on my brush, but I don't work with a lot on the brush at once. And tilt the bag this way, tilt the bag that way. Make sure that you're looking at that piping from all angles, because the last thing you want to do is be finished, have it sealed, and then all of a sudden you say, oh shoot, I see the brown. Because I promise you, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb if you're not a little bit diligent about it at this point. And again, this is where that wiping very well with the prep first comes in, because you don't need a lot now for it to absorb in and cover those spots. Whereas if we didn't, those spots would be sort of resistant to the dye, and we absolutely do not want that. All right, I'm just going to turn the bag over, look at it from this side, and then just again, checking, eye spotting, making sure there's nothing that was missed. A little streak on that, so I gotta fix that up. Okay, so there you go. So now, what we'd do is we would let this coat dry a full 24 hours, okay? And for purposes of this demonstration, we're going to pretend that it's been 24 hours. I will go back and do a second coat with the required dry time, but I want to show you the full process. So let's pretend it's been overnight, it's dried. I'm going to come back in, and I mean it does dry to the touch quickly. I mean, it's not on my hands, so it's dry-ish right now, but don't be fooled. It really should be left to sit to absorb into the leather for a full 24 hours before you do the next coat. So, and again, this bag is actually, by the time you're seeing this has been gone back to the customer. I've pre-filmed for the next couple of weeks because of the Christmas season. I know I'm going to be very busy, so none of this that you're seeing is happening right now. I'm sorry. These are all gone back to the customer, so it's possible you've seen this bag if you follow me on Instagram or on Facebook, but this is just the tutorial of how I did it. So it's been 24 hours in our mind, and we're going to come back in with our acetone cloth again and re-wipe again. And this is going to take off anything excess that didn't stick the first go around, okay? And if it didn't stick the first time, it's not going to stick permanently, so there's no going over it. It's just going to make a sloppy mess. So give it a good wipe those edges, okay? And then we're just going to come right back in. Acetone dries pretty quickly once it hits the air. So I just wait until it see how it looks wet? Let's see if I can get that. Okay, so it has a little bit of a wet look to it. I give it, 30, 40 seconds, fan it off, and it dries very, very quickly once it hits air. So you can see, okay. Whoops, I'm bad at that. Okay, so it's dry, right? So now that the acetone is dissolved, or evaporated, I should say, that's the right word. Now that the acetone is evaporated, we come back in with another coat of dye, and we do exactly, the same thing. And this is what I'm talking about. Look, if I just slop it on and I start moving the bag around, you'll see it's starting to streak and puddle. It's starting to streak and puddle down the sides. That's an example of what not to do, okay? So I'm showing you that. That's what happens if you don't spread it out. And that will, it's not fatal. The bag isn't going to look awful, but it's not going to look professional. It's not going to look, I don't want to say perfect, because none of these bags are perfect. And I know a lot of people watch this and say, oh, your work is perfect. And that expectation is a little bit unrealistic. One, I'm showing this to you on camera. So, any minor little tiny imperfections you don't see. I see them. I notice them if they're there. I've had customers point stuff out to me and send it back, and I fixed it. But, nothing is perfect. But, when there's a process that you can undertake in order to make it as perfect as you can make it, I always try to do that, because, this is somebody else's bag. It's somebody else's baby. They want to use it. They want to carry it. They want to be able to knock into a door and not have it be ruined. I've done that before. So, I just take my time, go over all the take some necessary precaution. Don't just be a mess and just slop it on there, because the result is going to be affected if you do that. Okay, so we go ahead and you wipe off any excess again. We don't want that pooling. That is not how it's supposed to look. It will definitely not look like it just came out of the Louis Vuitton factory dyed black if you do that. So I'm going to wipe that off. All that excess has to go. Okay. And you will notice when you first start wiping, it will feel a little bit tacky. But once you get the excess off, that goes away and then it just feels smooth, like you can hear, right? Okay, so you can hear my cloth is running smoothly over the leather. It's not getting stuck, or any area that it is, like hear that? It's getting a little bit stuck under there. That means there's still a little too much dye in that area. So I gotta rub it a little bit more. All right, so once all that tacky feeling is off, here you go, and have it. There is that side. And I will do one more coat on that for 3 full coats before it's done. And again, letting it dry 24 hours, wiping it first with my prep, and then applying the dye. So I am going to go ahead. The same process is for the handles, and I'll show you what it looks like once it's all done. All right, guys, I'm back, and the bag is all finished. So I will show you now. I've gone ahead. As you can see, this side is completely dyed. The handles on both sides are dyed. They're not completely dry yet. Again, it's 24 hours at least for me to even consider it to be fully dried. So that's still drying. I've dyed the zipper rail. The zipper hasn't been cleaned yet, so it doesn't look its best. But the zipper rail has been dyed, and the bag is now, for all intents and purposes, done. So what I'm going to do is this will dry for a full 24 hours at least. If it still feels a little bit tacky to the touch, like these sides, the 2 sides in the bottom, the 3 sides in the bottom that I did prior to this tutorial are completely dry. They've been drying a couple of days now. So they feel smooth, they don't feel tacky, they feel like dry. There's no transfer coming off of my hand, even though it's not sealed yet, but they're completely dry and finished. This side still has a slight tack feel to it, as do the handles. Even though they've been wiped, when you've been doing it for a while, you can just sort of feel it's not dry yet. So this will dry at least 24 hours until that tacky feel is completely gone. And then what I'll do is I'll take a clean rag, wipe it down really well, and then I'm going to seal the whole thing with leather sheen. It is the same process that I showed you on the previous tutorial for sealing leather sheen. I apply it with a sock and just rub it all over the bag until the bag is sealed and do a couple of coats. And then as soon as that's done, this is all set and will be off on its way to back to its owner. So there you have it. That is how to dye Louis Vuitton Epi Leather. Thanks for watching. Bye.